Okay, guys, so this is Monday movie night on the demographics for the avatar. And at this point in the game, basically, you're really starting to document down. So this is more about filling out the worksheets. And like it said in the video there, a lot of the information here is going to come from your experience. So you can also get demographics from the last few steps. You know, if you're going through the ACT protocol in the sequence that it's laid out, you should have most of the information here that you need to go ahead and fill this out. So like it said, the very first step is figuring out your most profitable market. And your Bob, your avatar is going to become, it's going to come out of that. So your avatar is going to emerge out of that profitable market. I see so many people that get this wrong. And what they do, they start developing an avatar before they've really identified which market is the most profitable. And what happens when you do that, you move forward into your creation, you start crafting your marketing message and your offers and your language and all that, a lot of times you will really miss the mark. Sometimes you'll miss the mark big time, in fact. So really important that you develop this avatar out of that segment of the market, that segment that is the most profitable. And keep in mind, what the most profitable means, it means there's got to be enough people in that segment to satisfy your sales goals, and they've got to be able to not only afford your product, but you're going to create demand and desire for the product for them. So it's got to be a big enough market, big enough segment, and the people in the segment has to be in that range where they can afford whatever it is that you're selling. So keep those things in mind when you're doing this, and also when you're doing those previous steps, when you're segmenting your markets. That's really what you're looking for. And the reason you're doing that is so when you get here, you know who your Bob is going to be. They're going to emerge out of that information. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can come on out and ask away. So if you guys don't know how to unmute, you can hit the chat button as well and let me know in there. But anyway, there's not really a lot to this. This is a pretty simple, straightforward module, so we may not have a lot of Q&A on this one. I think the main points I really just hit and reiterated. But if you guys have questions or comments, or you're stuck at this point, go ahead and come out, ask your questions, and we'll get them answered for you. Hey, Daniel, how's it going? You got here after our, we already watched the movie, but we're just in the Q&A portion here. So this is all about the demographics portion. And really, it comes down to there's not a lot of research to be done at this point. It's more about filling out the worksheets and making sure that they come from that profitable market segment. So, all right, guys, last call here for questions before we wrap it up.
So, John, I don't really have any questions, but I would just like to hear you talk more about it.
Okay. Well, I know, like, for example, in your situation, you are, like I had mentioned before, a lot of times we are our own Bob. And I think that's very much the case in your situation because you created your product line for you. Yep. So when you're answering a lot of the questions, what you want to do is you don't think about now. Forget about how you are now and where you are now. You really want to take a step back to where you were then, before you created the product. You want to get into that mindset, so that's the empathy that you want to feel. Like, especially moving forward when you're doing the empathy grid and you're having to answer how your Bob was feeling, what they were seeing, what they were hearing. make sure you take yourself back to that point when you were the Bob, because you're no longer the Bob, but you were.
Yeah.
So definitely keep that in mind when you're, when you're following through and doing these exercises, because a lot of times we'll forget that. We'll forget where we came from, and we focus on where we are, and a lot of times that's where your avatar wants to get to. So it's really important that you go back and understand where they are and how they feel, and what their problems are, so you can associate with them and create that trust and rapport. Because if they get the feeling that you understand them and you know what they're going through, that's a big thing. That's a huge deal for them. That means trust and rapport like nothing else.
So do we put that in our ads, John?
Yeah, that can actually, any kind of languaging that can resonate with them right from the beginning all the way through. So from the point at the ad, the big idea, it's a lot easier to come up with a big idea understanding where they're at, what they're experiencing.
I mean, do we reference ourselves? Do we talk about our story if we in the ads or not?
In the ads are very short. So the ads, like when I think of the ad, I'm more thinking of like the Facebook ad that's getting them to click through and come over to you.
Okay.
So when you're doing that, you only have like a couple of sentences to really grab their attention.
Okay.
You can't really get into stories and ads. You can certainly get into stories on landing pages though.
Okay.
When they hit your landing page, you could come right out of the gate and you could go into a story there. You could say, yeah, I was experiencing this. I know what you're feeling like because I was there, and here's what was happening to me. Here's how I felt, and here, I was hopeless, and no one could help me, and no one understood me, and no one heard what I was saying.
Okay.
And if that's the state that they're in, and they're experiencing what you experienced, they're immediately going to say, wow, this is compelling, and they'll stick to it.
That helps. Thanks.
So story, as you get them in, that's where you have more opportunity to tell more of your story, for sure. But always, whatever it is, if it's, when you tell your story, it's important that you craft the story to the situation. You're not just telling the story for the sake of telling the story. You're telling the story for certain reasons. You're doing it to show them that they're just like you, or you're just like them, and that you were hopeless at that point, just like they are, and that you found a better way, and you're going to share that with them.
Okay.
So it's always, everything that you do in creation is all marketing and should all be treated like that. So it's that master plan, it's that strategy, that underlying strategy of trying to figure out what it is that you ultimately want to do, and then using the marketing to accomplish that strategy to implement.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so that's the big piece. That's the big important thing for the avatar, is really just really understanding them. And for those of you that are not your avatar, and you just, maybe you did research, or maybe you knew about a marketplace that you created a product for you guys, it's especially important to not only do research online, but actually talk to people that are your ideal customers and really ask them a lot of questions and really get inside their heads of what they're feeling and all of that stuff. So really important to do that. So, all right, anybody else? Any other questions before we cut out here?
Hey, this is Dan.
Hey, Dan, go ahead.
So 2 questions, and I'll start with the first one. If for service-based businesses, you've talked about you use the realtor example, and if you have a different message for a buyer versus a seller, and I'm in the service-based business, Can you expand on that a little bit? And I know your message has to be different, but can you walk through what the potential client might see for the first time, all the way through maybe pick up the phone and setting the appointment? Because what I'm finding, just for people who find me through my website, is they're very unqualified customers, and
Okay.
they're really just like kicking tires or essentially kind of wasting my time. So I'm hoping the information I learn here I can use, and really by the time they call me, they're qualified and they're ready to go.
Okay, sure. So the thing that you brought up there, like the realtors, the fact that there's a buyer and a seller, those are two completely different avatars. So if you find yourself in the service business and you service uh, different avatars for different things, you really need to have your website have a self-selection process. And what I mean by a self-selection process is have like, it depends on how many avatars you have, but if you have two or three, you basically want to have two or three choices that they have to click on one of those choices. They have to choose which one they are. Like in the case of a realtor, it might be buyers and sellers. You know, are you here? Are you interested in buying a property or selling a property? And then when they click on that, they go into that section of the website and it only addresses that Bob, that buyer. So let's say they click on buying a home and they go into the home buying section of the website, and it only speaks to the buyer. It only has their language, doesn't talk about the seller or anything that's important to the seller, only what's important to the buyer. So you want to do that self-selection process on your site. Like I saw a site that was a product site, and it was about cosmetics. And the cosmetics that they sold had like two or three different purposes. So they clearly had like three different avatars. One of them was anti-aging. One of them was beauty. And the other one was, believe it or not, it was weight loss. And they self-selected. They had three choices. There was nothing else to click on the whole front page. You had to click on either beauty, anti-aging, or weight loss. And when you did, you went into a separate section of the site that only addressed that. There was no links back to the other two. You were corralled into that one. And the whole idea, like you had mentioned, of getting unqualified leads, a lot of times when you get unqualified leads, it's because you haven't asked for the right thing, and you kind of dumped a lot of people in one big pot. So it's important, like in the process, if you've got people that you're setting appointments with, and you're doing it in an automated fashion, and you're just allowing anybody onto your calendar to schedule appointments, you might want to put another phase in there. And you might want to set up a thing like where when they sign up for to get an appointment with you, first they've got to do an online survey. And then once the survey is completed, at that point, the survey comes to you and they automatically get a link to your calendar to schedule the appointment. Now you have an opportunity to look at the survey results, and if you know this is not somebody you can help or somebody that you even want to deal with, then you can go ahead and you can just cancel the appointment. You can just send them an email and say, you know, we're not really a good fit here, so I'm canceling out the appointment. So is that basically where it's at? You've got people that you just don't even want to deal with, or is there a possibility that you could serve them and send them off to somebody else?
It's actually both. So for clients or for people I cannot help, I try to find somebody who is in my network to refer them to. So it's kind of a twofold issue with me. Is one, whether I can help them or not, and then the other part, and you actually answered my question, is I serve. I have a couple of different practice areas, and so my avatar might be maybe 5 or maybe 10. So, but I guess my next question is, How many is too many as far as self-selection goes?
Well, usually on self-selection, you want to keep it to as few as possible, and then you can actually have them self-select more than once. Like for the instance, let's say we had the real estate example again, and we've got the first self-selection is buyer and seller, and then they click on the buyer, so they want to buy a home. So you might send them to a page that self-selects them again, and it might say, you know, are you buying this house as a bachelor pad? Are you buying this house as a single mom? Or are you buying this house as a family that's growing and looking to move into a home that suits your family needs better? So you went from 2 selections to 3 selections. And then, you know, if they click on, let's say they clicked on the bachelor pad, you know, you've got a single guy here. Now, you know a lot about him at this point. It goes from just having a bunch of generic people on your real estate site to knowing that you've got a bachelor that wants to buy a bachelor pad. So you could effectively speak his language now. So the more you can get them self-selected down, the more that you'll be able to do that to get that language and that messaging right. And I don't really think there's too many, but keep this in mind too. The more avatars that you do, the more marketing messages you're going to need to create, the more languages you're going to need to script out. So it's a matter of work. So just keep that in mind. That's why I always come back to this, is I always come back to identify who your most profitable one is first and work on that. Get that one dialed in, get that one converting, and then drive traffic to that one. And when you drive traffic, you can drive traffic very, very specifically. So it's not like you're driving generic traffic and you've got to self-select all these out and figure out who they are. You should be able to drive traffic very specifically to them. So when you do that, you're really focusing on one, you're getting that one right, and then you're moving on to another one. And a lot of times, a lot of the information you can duplicate. You just edit it slightly and you've got it pretty close. But when you try and do too many right out of the gate, that's when it becomes overwhelming, and either you cut corners and you don't do near as good a job on it, or you don't get through and you just give up and it doesn't work at all. So that's the two big downfalls to trying to go too wide right out of the gate.
Okay. And then you did mention 2 or 3 self-selectors, and I visualize it as kind of going deeper as the self-selection goes.
Uh-huh.
How is there kind of an optimal number as far as the number of self-selectors as far as going deep goes?
Not really. It kind of depends on what you're doing. And think of it this way. If you were going to, let's say you were going to play the role of the salesperson in your business, and you were going to sit down with somebody that you didn't know anything about. And what are the main questions that you would gather to be able to speak effectively to them? That's kind of how you would gauge that. So it was really simple there with the real estate example. The first question we're going to ask them is, would you like to buy a house, or are you here to sell a house? And that would be the first question, regardless of whether they were male or female, or had their kids with them, or had their grandparents with them, or whatever. You would need to know that first. So that's your first self-selection question. So all you're really doing here is you're doing the same thing you would do in the real world. It's not like some magical hocus pocus thing. You're really just taking the process that has always worked, offline, and we're bringing it online. So whatever that line of questioning would be, and whatever the order it would be in, that's how you want to get your self-selection process, so you can kind of filter it down.
Okay.
So I know that's kind of a roundabout answer to a specific question, but there really isn't a specific answer to that one. It's for your particular business. It might be 1 or 2 questions, and it might be 20. I don't, that's something that you would have to figure out. As much information as you need to collect, like if you were to meet person to person with somebody, as much information as you would need to collect before you did an effective presentation, that's going to be the answer for your question.
Okay. Okay.
And then once you get that information, and it's just like in the real world, once you had gathered that, you've got it locked in up here, and now you're going to start your conversation. You're going to start your presentation. That's why the whole avatar thing, understanding who your avatar is the only way that you can write effective copy for it. Because all you're doing in the copy, you're reproducing the conversation that you would have face to face. And the only way to create an effective conversation face to face is either to ask enough questions to know who they are and what they needed and what was important to them, or you get that information predefined. And you get them, to that self-selection process where you know who it is that you're talking to. And that's how you get it really, really effective. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah, it does. And if you can tell me from your experience, because I think for me, I think I'm actually my own worst customer.
Well, that's always the case. When we try and do anything for ourselves, we are the worst at it for ourselves. And I totally fit in the shoe for that one. It's like I'm really good at this stuff for everybody else, but every time I come back around and I try and do it for myself, I fall right on my face.
Right. So, as far as the barriers go, how do you kind of balance, qualifying, putting up these things to qualifying them, versus too much friction to work with you, in a sense, if that makes sense?
Well, a lot of times what you can do, you're absolutely right. The more questions you ask, the more likely it is that someone is going to bug out. So there is, a fine line there with how much information you can get before they just say, yeah, I'm not going any further. One of the things that you can do is micro commitments.
Right.
And when you're working with somebody virtually, the best thing to do is just to ask the first couple of questions, get those submitted, and then you respond back. And a lot of times you can do that in an automated way. So, like based on their responses, you can respond back, with a different message or something of that nature. And there's a lot of programs out there that will do that. Like, you can have forms, you can have surveys that when certain questions are answered, like you might even set up where they take a test, and based on their test results, and you don't have to tell them it's a test, but you set it up that way. So based on their results, they're going to get an outcome page. And the outcome page is basically the next line of questioning. That might be, fill out this information, and we're going to give you a rating score on how likely it is that you might win your case, or how much you might get out of that case if you did win. Something like that they're going to actually get something of value back, and then that's also going to tell you if you want to talk to them or not. And you could ask, certain questions, like you said, some people you might want to pass off to another vendor. If you know the answers to the questions that would trigger that, then you can automate that as well. If you know the answers to the question that would trigger you wanting to get on the phone with them, you might send them a different calendar link that has more urgency in it. You might want to send them your cell phone and say, dude, you need to call me right now. We need to talk. This is important that you do it right now. You don't want to send your cell phone number out to the looky-loos and the tire kickers. So, that whole process, basically you're building a mousetrap. and you don't want to have a cougar come into your mousetrap, tear it apart.
Right.
So you got to make sure that you only draw the right mice into your mousetrap.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Anything else? I think you had a couple of questions. Did we get them both?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, awesome. All right. Anybody else? Last call here. All right, guys. Well, thank you for participating. It's awesome when you guys come out for the Monday movie night and put your input in so we can get get all these questions answered for everybody. And again, there are no bad questions on any of these calls, whether it be the Monday movie night or the Thursday calls or our apprentice calls. Anywhere where you're having problems, it's okay to ask your questions. This is not for advanced people. It's not just for beginners. It's for everybody. So if you get on and I'm answering a question for something that's really technical or really far down the line, really advanced, don't think that you can't ask a simple question right after that, because you can. This is for you guys for anything, any problem you're at. And I want that to just be out there so there's never any friction, never any concern. Always ask your questions. So, all right, guys, thank you for participating in another Monday movie night. We will be back on, actually, I might skip next week. I'm going to be in Las Vegas. I will let you know if we're going to do it. I'll send out an email blast, and if not, we'll be back on the following week. So have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.